nice to do this in Canastota. Do you guys know how I ended up here?
No.
My friend Ann Smith, who lives on Peterborough Street, is married to Dick Smith, who is the Canastota booster of the world. And I had decided that when I retired, I wanted to live in a village. And I was looking in Liverpool, and she sent me a picture of this house one day. This white house with red shutters. It's the old Tianello home on Peterborough Street. That was it. And I have fallen in love with this village. I love this library. I brought my grandchildren here for the first time, and they had all these costumes here, you know, that the kids can put on. And then we went down to Zem's, and then we went to your house, the Smith's house, and they renamed this town Canastota. So that's what, are we going to Canastota for Christmas? Absolutely. And the parade, of course. And they live in Toronto. They go to these big museums and all this, but what's their favorite place in the world? Canastota. Right? So I'm really happy to be here. I did a lot of the writing of this book here, so it's particularly enjoyable to do this here. This face, her name, for those of you who haven't read the book yet, is Aileen O'Malley. And she is Black Irish, and she was a young woman who immigrated to the United States in search of her kidnapped siblings. And she ended up searching for them along the Erie Canal. My goal with Aileen O'Malley is to have her become to the Erie Canal what Anne of Green Gables is to Prince Edward Island. Okay? Because the Erie Canal deserves to have somebody like that. Now, it may take a while because I looked it up, and Anne of Green Gables was published in 1908. I'm already 72. You know, they had a TV series, they had a doll, they had all that kind of thing. So it may take a while for that to happen, but that is the goal. Get this to work. I'm going to play the trailer for the book now, and that really explains the story. I'm always challenged by equipment, and I didn't mean to do that again. Here we go. Okay. I grew up in East Syracuse, New York. My love affair with the Erie Canal started when I was a youngster, about 8 years old. My cousin Mary Ann's here tonight. Her grandmother and my father were brother and sister. And they grew up on a farm just south of Green Lake, the Armstrong farm, overlooking the Erie Canal. And when I was a little girl, my dad would take me to the farm sometimes and tell me stories. And the story that always stuck in my head was, he told me this story about how they would take the horses down the hill to the canal with this machine and cut out blocks of ice and pack them in sawdust and drag them back up to the farm to keep vegetables cold, etc. And I never forgot that, and I was intrigued with the canal ever since. It takes me a while to get things done. I had thought about writing that book when I was 8 years old. Didn't start writing until I was 69, but whatever. College took me quite a while too. It took me 7.5 years to get out of college. I went to a community college, Auburn Community College, fabulous place. Oswego State University, waited on tables, earned the tuition, took a couple courses. That's how I got my education. I wouldn't do it any other way. Then I had a great career. I'm very grateful for the career that I had. I started out in the New York State Assembly, so I learned a lot about politics when I was young. Then I did housing for rural migrant farm workers, and I worked for the county, community development. But most of my career was spent at Niagara Mohawk, now National Grid, I still call it Niagara Mohawk, and at Syracuse University. But the Niagara Mohawk years were the years when I fell in love with canal communities like this one. Because I was vice president for economic development, so I spent my time sitting in diners with mayors of all these little towns along the canal. And they told me all these great stories, and they took me to all these wonderful places that I wouldn't have seen otherwise. And so we lit a lot of historic buildings on the canal, and we started something 25 years ago called the Digital Towpath. I think to myself, we were a little ahead of our time with that one. At the same time, I was pretty good friends with Jim Walsh, who was congressman at the time, and he wrote the legislation to create the Erie Canalway Heritage Corridor. And that got me further involved, and it was on that, I'm still on that, I've been on that for a very, very long time. One thing I have found is that, and it's frustrating to me, I don't know if it is to you, upstate New York changed the world, and people don't know about it. That's right. Mm-hmm. And when you think of what happened here, you know, if you go outside and you look at that little 40-foot wide piece of water, 7 million immigrants took that little path of water. The canal is how the West was won. We see a lot of the wagons and the horses and all that kind of thing. Well, they were in canal boats before they were in wagons, okay? This was the channel to the West. This was also the Silicon Valley of its day. Everything was invented here. Penicillin, steam engine, you name it. It was invented in upstate New York. Thomas Edison had little laboratories all over this place. He had some in Syracuse, he had some in Schenectady. This was the place of invention. It was home to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which you all know. And so it's bothered me that it's so missing in the creative stage. There's not, you know the movie about Harriet Tubman? I think there's maybe a minute that takes place in Auburn. It's all in Auburn is where she lived. We're just missing from plays, from books, from movies, and it's always bothered me. Now, I gave Jimmy Stewart credit, that movie, How the West Was Won, it had 1.5 minutes of them on the canal before they headed west, but that was really about it. So that's always bothered me, and I wanted to do something about it, and I think I did. My protagonist is Aileen O'Malley. She was a rather imperious young woman. She was privileged in Ireland. Her grandmother owned land, which was unusual. She was very Catholic and very dogmatic in her views, and like I said, a little bit more privileged than a lot of people. Irish women were some of the only immigrants where young women came alone. And they did that more than any other ethnic group, many times to be, you know, housekeepers and that kind of thing, and take care of children. And there's many, many interesting stories of them. I made this one up. And her father in the story is indentured to work on the Erie Canal. And her siblings have been kidnapped. Now that again, this is a story, but it's all, I based it all in good history. Children were kidnapped frequently in those years in Ireland and put on ships and sold on the wharfs of New York City. So this was something that did indeed happen. When you think about it, what happened in this place we call home, in this little period of time, 36 years from when the canal opened to the Civil War started, is a tiny, tiny period of time. And an amazing number of things happened here. My book begins in Cork, Ireland, and it ends in Auburn, New York, after the Civil War. In writing a historic fiction story, you could not create a more dynamic environment than what existed here during those years. Everything was going on. 7 million immigrants of all these different nationalities giving up their Calvinistic religious practices where they believed their future was all mapped out for them on the day they were born. Well, once they came to America, they said, maybe I can make my own future. Maybe I should make my own religion. And they started having these revivals. They had revivals here in the woods when nobody had cars, by the way. 6,000, 7,000 people. And they would stay for a week and a half. And there were panthers in these woods at that time. I mean, this was quite the challenge. But these they actually called this the burned over district because it was so hot with religious fervor. President Jackson was doing the Indian removal then, so there was a great deal of dislocation happening. And, the Mormon religion was founded on the banks of the Erie Canal. The Millerites, I don't know if you've ever heard of them, they were convinced the world was going to end, and they're hysterical, because they set a date for it. Thousands of people believed them, and they missed the date, and they set another date. It was really kind of funny. But again, with the canal and this environment that my story takes place, these cities just rose overnight. Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester and Utica. Because the cost of transporting goods was reduced by 95%. No one thought this was going to work. And it worked so well, it blew everybody's mind. I mean, that's a huge, huge amount. So I placed my characters among the 7 million immigrants, German, British, Norwegian primarily, and Irish, that traveled these waters. And this was really chaos at that time. The Irish famine was going on. Ireland lost 1/4 of its population. Within this chaos, Aileen interacts with people who you know and you've heard of. Elizabeth Cady Stanton from the women's movement, she spent her summers in Peterborough. She was a cousin of Garrett Smith's. So of course we have Eileen meet her, right? On the green. A lot of people aren't aware that Frederick Douglass made a trip to Ireland, a really important trip to Ireland. And as you know, he walked the streets of this village. And of course, there's a great deal about Garrett Smith. And I feel so grateful, again, if I hadn't moved here, I wouldn't have wandered up the hill one day and met Dot and Norm. And I told her I was so fascinated with that story about the Utica riot and how they got off the canal boats here in Canastota and walked up the hill. It just intrigued me. And she said to me, well, we have farmers' diaries that tell us that they were singing freedom songs as they walked up the hill. And I sort of felt the shiver go up my back. I was intrigued with that to begin with. And that's how we ended up getting into doing the abolition walk here. It's good music. As a young nation, we were so divided, and we held radically different concepts of right and wrong. And today we're still arguing over some of those issues. Some of the characters in my books you'll recognize quite well. They were the major change makers of the day. Garrett Smith, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Stephen Myers, Ulysses S. Grant. When you think about it, they all lived within 120 miles of each other, here. I mean, I like to imagine them all getting on the same canal boat at some point, because it might have happened. They were here, and they knew one another. And these are the characters that I made up as a part of my story to interact with the real characters. Aileen, her love interest, Jedediah, Tracy, got a little love story, right? Betha Dooley, who's one of my favorite characters, if I do say so. She is Aileen's grandmother from Ireland. Joseph Ryan, who's a scoundrel. Jimmy, who is her friend. Viney, Rose, and Leah. And I named Leah after Joanne Shenandoah. And I was happy to do that. So I'm trying to keep my story alive. And I want to speak a little bit about how I'm doing this. Have you guys heard of novel tourism? Okay. Did you read, Hemingway, The Sun Also Rises? Such a famous book. Well, I looked it up one day, and I'm forgetting the name of it, but there's a bullfighting place in Spain. And bullfighting isn't in vogue anymore, but 7 million people go there every year to this day because of that book and the bullfight that took place in that book. And, the first time I read Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, I went to Savannah and read it there. It had such a better impact on me. So in addition to being the novel I always wanted to write, this book is really kind of my love letter to upstate New York. I love upstate New York. So I want to give people the opportunity, or encourage people to experience what happened in the book in upstate New York. So I've developed this little thing, and there's cards if you want to download them, to get people to come and experience pieces of the book in the places where the story unfolds. I encourage readers you can experience her ride up the Hudson. Now, when she arrived in New York, by the way, that was the anti-Catholic time. She was treated horribly in New York City. That's the time of the anti-Catholic riots. I mean, it was a very dangerous place for a Catholic girl to be. So she was very happy to start riding up the Hudson River. And they still have these boats. Last week I was at the Hudson River Maritime Museum, and the boats are still there, and they make cruises up the river. It's a wonderful thing you can do. You can even, a place you might not be aware of is in Albany on Livingston Avenue. It's the home of Stephen and Harriet Myers. And he was a very famous Underground Railroad person, and also spent a lot of time here. He started one of the big African-American farming communities that were up near Central Square. 80 families, funded by Garrett Smith. Very, very popular. And then I encourage people, of course, to come here, and I want to read to you the page out of the book that deals with Canastota. Revisit Aileen's arrival in Canastota, followed by a Freedom afternoon in stunningly beautiful Madison County. Make reservations with Marlene for lunch at the Center Street Market, where you can get the best chicken pot pie in the world. Then walk around the corner to the Canal Town Museum. Trace the route of the abolitionists who were driven out of Utica and ultimately formed the New York State Anti-Slavery Society by driving up the hill to Peterborough. Imagine Frederick Douglass chatting with Garrett Smith in the land office at the Smith Estate. On your way back down the hill, enjoy views that reach all the way to Lake Ontario. Make a quick turn to visit Nichols Pond and stop at the archaeological site of the 15th century Oneida Village and grain pits. Top off your freedom-themed day with an abolition ale at the Erie Canal Brewery. So that's what I kind of do for the different spots. Now, this audience knows the power and beauty of Chittenango Falls. People downstate don't. They ask me more questions in Kingston about Chittenango Falls, because a lot of them had read the book, and as you know, there's very dramatic scenes that take place at Chittenango Falls, and we have this in our backyard, and it is just so amazing. What a lot of people don't know is that is the divide where the Onondaga and the United Nations territories met, was at Chittenango. And as I said, there's a very climactic scene that takes place there. Now, Casanova is truly, to this day, it's just a step back in time. And Eileen, her daughter Bessie, and Corporal Terry Green attended the Fugitive Slave Law Convention there in Grace Wilson's orchard. And I encourage people to have lunch at the Lincoln House, where you can almost imagine the gossip that was going on when the Fugitive Slave Law Convention was being held. You can visit Molly, who was her daughter, who she was seeking, Can you imagine how frustrated she was when she found out, she finally found Molly, and she was at the United Community Mansion House where there were unconventional, we'll use that word, practices. You can grab a cup of coffee at Freedom of Espresso in Fayetteville and visualize Eileen and Jedediah's store on the Erie Canal. You know, the village was full of mills at that time. And you can even take a walk up this street to the Matilda Jocelyn Gage House, which is really wonderful. There's many, I like to think, vivid passages in the book that describe traveling on the canal. So you can go to Syracuse, to the Erie Canal Museum, the only one of its kind, and they have a full-size replica, and you can sit on it, and you can read some of those passages to one another if you want to. There's many opportunities to boat the canal with a book under your arm. Herkimer, Camillus, the Sam Patch Group, the Riviere Group, etc. Several of them have called and asked me to do that this summer, and I'm going to. It's going to be fun. As most of you know, the 200th anniversary of the canal is this year. That's why I self-published, because I wanted to get it out in time for the 200th anniversary. You can relive the moment when Eileen and Jedediah stepped off their boat in Palmyra, where they met tragedy and where they declared their love for one another. You can imagine their frantic search across the village for her father and their visit to the Grandin bookstore, which is still there, which is the place where the Book of Mormon was published. If you haven't been to Lake Ontario's Eastern Shore, I have a cottage up there, and I'm addicted. I love it up there. It's wonderfully unpopulated and wonderfully beautiful. Well, there's a scene in the book, for those of you who have read it, where Eileen makes a sand map of her life, of her travel from Ireland to New York, up the Hudson, and the things that happened to her. And you can do the same thing. It's Southwood Beach. Now, if you haven't been to Oswego lately, go. That young mayor up there has revived that city. I went to college there. It was kind of a dump, okay? It was a great town, but it was kind of, you should see that place now. It looks magnificent. Oswego plays a really important role in my book. Garrett Smith owned half the harbor, and he made that quite the route for the Underground Railroad. He would send slaves up the canal to his business person in Oswego and load them aboard ships to go to Canada. He also paid for the library in Oswego, which, if you haven't been to it, next to this one, of course, is the nicest library in upstate New York. It's an incredibly beautiful design. It's really worth a visit. Dreams of Freedom ends in Auburn, and the epilogue happens there. The Seward home is there. I imagine many of you have been there. I'm a history nut. I've visited, I don't know, historic homes all over the country and in Europe. And I don't think there's a better one, a more preserved place. They left everything there, the silverware, the napkins, everything they used. Where else in the world can you go and see a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation written by Lincoln and edited by Seward? It's there, the actual document. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. So I think in these divided times, we must be determined to do what Eileen expresses in a letter to her daughter at the end of the book, which is, the task before you is to put your good mind, strong constitution, and sensitive heart to the task of making this a better land. And I think in the end, that's really what my book is all about. I've got bookmarks that you can have, pass those around, if you don't mind, that have that saying on them. I like it to be the promise of America. I think the book is a lot about the promise of America and one person's experience. So I encourage you, thank you to the people who bought my book. Thank you for coming tonight. Please help me to spread the word. It's the 200th anniversary of the canal, not just about my book, but about upstate New York in general. This is a really good year to do it. I had a young artist in Syracuse do this drawing for me. I thought she did a lovely job. And that's my story, Dreams of Freedom, an Irish woman's story of love, justice, and a young nation coming apart. That's it. Thank you.